Good evening. I'm delighted to be here, even though moderation is not really my strong suit. I'm very glad to be here tonight as the moderator and the book launch of Feminism Unfinished, A Short Surprising History of American Women's Movements. Well, I will introduce the authors in a little while. So let me first just tell you what the format will be, and then I will introduce our three speakers. We will have short, 10-minute presentations by the three speakers. Then we will give the authors 5 minutes apiece or so to respond to their comment, and then we will open it up to the audience for questions and comments. And then, of course, at the end, at 6:30, there will be a reception with wine and cheese. So let me start by introducing, in the order that they will speak, the three speakers for this evening. Michelle Chen, a remarkably prolific journalist, writes on economic, social, and political issues affecting women and low-wage workers in the U.S. and globally. Her work has appeared in The Nation, Ms. Magazine, Dissent, Huffington Post, The American Prospect, Alternet, Color Lines, The Progressive, and other media outlets. She is a contributing editor at In These Times and Culture Strike, and co-produces the community radio program Asia Pacific Forum on Pacifica's WBAI. Many of her articles are relevant to our discussion tonight, notably those on women's movements in the Middle East and Latin America, sex and race discrimination in the restaurant industry, fast food strikes and other low-wage worker campaigns for better wages and decent treatment, women's reproductive rights, and many other subjects. Our second speaker will be Jennifer Baumgardner, who is a writer, activist, and filmmaker whose work has both chronicled and shaped the direction of U.S. feminism for the last 2 decades. In her best-selling book, Manifesta, Young Women, Feminism, and the Future, co-authored with Amy Richards in 2000, Jennifer galvanized the generation of feminists who came of age in the decades after the women's movement of the 1960s and 70s. Manifesta's bold vision of activism continued in its 2005 sequel, Grassroots, a field guide for feminist activism, and in Jennifer's other books, including most recently, Effem, Goo Goo, Gaga, and Some Thoughts on Balls. In addition to being a regular contributor to a wide range of magazines and other news outlets, she is the co-creator of the Speakers Bureau, Soapbox, and the filmmaker behind the powerful documentary films It Was Rape and I Had an Abortion. In 2013, Jennifer was named executive director and publisher of the Feminist Press. Our third speaker is Nancy Hewitt, distinguished professor of history and women's studies and gender studies at Rutgers University, emeritus. Oh gosh, I'm so envious of that emeritus. Who is internationally known for her essays and books on women's rights in the 19th and 20th century U.S. Her inclusive histories of women's movements take seriously the voices of all women, have inspired many young and old, including the authors of Feminism Unfinished. Among her many recent books, the popular edited edition, No Permanent Waves, Recasting Histories of U.S. Feminism, and her multiple award-winning study of women's activism across race and ethnic lines, Southern Discomfort, Women's Activism in Tampa, Florida, 1880s to 1920s. She is a recipient of a prestigious Guggenheim Fellowship, was a fellow at the Center for Advanced Study at Stanford, and in 2009 was named the Pitt Professor of American History at the University of Cambridge. So I'm very delighted to welcome all three of them today. And Michelle, if you could start.
Thank you for coming, everyone.
Michelle, I think they want you to speak at the podium, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Yeah, I know it seems like
The Q&A you can do from your seat.
And there's a lot of seats here for you
Yeah,
guys
that's a good idea.
standing.
Completely awkward. Thank you. Well, this is much more official. Now I'm standing. So yes, thank you for inviting me to this distinguished panel for which I am totally not worthy, and I'm really glad to be a part of this discussion with a bunch of other women whose work I've been absorbing either through osmosis or through some of my research and scholarly work over the years. So I think it's an interesting moment to be having a discussion like this. And I guess I'm going first, perhaps because I'm the youngest or because I arrived last, but whatever it is, I just thought I'd start with something a little bit lighter to get people going. But the media was abuzz this week with talk about, or chatter rather, about Emma Watson's speech at the United Nations, in which she asked, why has the word feminism become such an uncomfortable one? Which was interesting because I thought the framing of her speech as well as her presentation was aimed explicitly at making the word feminism much more comfortable. And that got me thinking about why we should expect in this day and age for feminism to be comforting, or for that conversation to be somehow soothing or reassuring, or designed to not alienate people. And I think that's a tension that feminists and the feminist movement in all its various incarnations has always been wrestling with, both within itself, among its various factions and strands, as well as intergenerationally, and also with the wider public. So, and then I thought about, well, Emma Watson, well, she kind of invokes the whole trope of Harry Potter, and she's sort of in an interesting pop cultural position because she is sort of a girl and a child, and yet she's also this emerging woman, and she's sort of, we're watching her as she defines herself in life and on screen for us. And I thought back to my first encounter with, I would say, the language of feminism, or with maybe the ideology of feminism, though I don't really think I had a name for it back then. And I remember when I was in 8th grade, I had actually seen an ad in 17 magazine. So yes, I'm beginning this talk with an anecdote about 17 magazine. Not a good way to start off a feminist lecture, but so that was me. And I saw an ad soliciting volunteer writers for a startup publication back then. It was actually on a real piece of paper. It was called the New Girl Times. And they were asking for volunteers. It was a short-lived publication. I don't even know how long it went on, but they were asking for contributors to their inaugural issue. And I was kind of a budding writer. I was working on my first zine at the time, and just starting to get into the world of what I thought was publishing on my Mac Plus. And then so I wrote, and then I got an introduction to the magazine and sort of a preface on what it was intended to be as a project. And I was really struck by the sort of syrupy language that it invoked, and it was sort of a very girly, what I thought was girly, attempt at making feminism palatable and appealing to sort of the tween generation, which was, you know, in the 1990s, just sort of emerging as a consumer group then. I wasn't thinking about all of this as I was 14 years old and looking at the introduction, but something about it struck me as off. And then I went to my computer and I typed out a sort of an angry screed about why I was so offended that this publication, with the audacity to call itself the New Girl Times, was trying to do this cutesy thing, that they were taking women's issues and sort of dumbing them down and making them sort of fun and carefree and sort of teen magazine-like. And so I published it in my zine, and I did sort of like a mock-up, like I did sort of a send-up of the publication itself, because I kind of took, I was into cut and paste then, because that's how you did zines, if anyone remembers those, and I took the logo, which was actually a mock-up of the New York Times logo, except they replaced the word Times with girl, and so I just had this like complete like screed making fun of this publication, and I was angry, and then I sent it to the publisher of this publication and kind of like awaited her feedback, and she wrote back with just like a single sentence and said, you know, I understand you won't be writing for us. I was deeply upset by what you wrote, so that's that. And then I think I felt a pang of embarrassment, and I was sort of like, why did I do that? But then thinking about it now, I mean, I was an angsty teen, and I was just blowing off steam, and I think I wanted to make a point about why feminism was silly then. And now that I look back at it, it sort of strikes me as my first encounter, not just with feminism, but with also the ambivalence that surrounds feminism